Before he was a Russian citizen, before the lawsuits, the ponytail, the whisper campaign of CIA connections, or the decades of disturbing allegations, Steven Seagal was just a kid from Lansing, Michigan, with asthma, a flair for tall tales, and a dream of becoming something big. And if Hollywood didn't hand it to him, he'd manufacture the legend himself. Stephen Frederick Seagal was born in 1952, the son of a math teacher and a medical technician. He grew up in Michigan, but you wouldn't know it from the strange, theatrical accent he started adopting somewhere in his 40s, a bizarre blend of southern drawl, Buddhist monk and mafia consigliere. He claimed he was a sickly child, barely able to walk, who miraculously healed himself through martial arts. A compelling story, though not exactly verifiable. As a teenager, he became obsessed with Eastern spirituality and martial arts, especially Aikido, a Japanese discipline known more for its flowing throws and joint locks than practical fighting. But young Stephen was smitten, and he wasn't bad at it. By 17, he'd moved to Japan, allegedly to study Aikido full-time. Some say he washed dishes to support himself. Others suspect the details were a little more cinematic than realistic. Either way, this is where he began constructing the myth of the most dangerous man alive. In Japan, he met Miyako Fujitani, a beautiful Aikido black belt and the daughter of a respected dojo owner in Osaka. They married. And, with Miyako by his side, Seagal gained instant credibility. He eventually took over her family dojo, not by founding it, mind you, but by marrying into it. From there, the backstory started to grow, murkier. Seagal claimed he was the first Westerner to open a dojo in Japan, a statement Aikido historians immediately questioned. He also began dropping hints about a mysterious past, that he'd done classified missions for the CIA, fought off members of organized crime syndicates, and trained elite military units. He suggested that he'd seen things too dangerous to talk about. There's never been any actual evidence for any of this, but back then, no one was fact-checking, and his confidence was magnetic. By the early 1980s, Seagal returned to the US, leaving Miyako and their 2 children behind in Japan. He re-emerged in Los Angeles, where he reinvented himself once again, this time as a high-end martial arts instructor for the Hollywood elite. He started teaching Aikido to powerful figures, including Michael Ovitz, one of the most influential agents in the business and co-founder of CAA, Creative Artists Agency. Ovitz was so taken with Seagal's presence, his height, his physique, his intense stillness, that he decided to make him a movie star. Mind you, Seagal wasn't an actor, not by training, not by instinct. He was stiff, monotone, and often emotionless on camera, but he had a vibe. That laser-like stare, the slicked-back hair, the deep, whispery voice that somehow made everything sound vaguely threatening. And most importantly, he had a persona. Hollywood was intrigued. In 1988, Warner Bros. Rolled the dice on Above the Law, a gritty action thriller crafted to launch Seagal's film career. It worked. The movie was a modest success, and critics couldn't quite explain Seagal's appeal, but it was undeniable. He wasn't flashy like Van Damme or lovable like Schwarzenegger. He didn't spin kick. He walked through scenes like a slow-moving storm, breaking bones and delivering justice in a soft-spoken monotone. He was icy, intense, and briefly, cool. That success opened the floodgates. Seagal starred in Hard to Kill, Marked for Death, and Out for Justice, each more aggressively titled than the last. The movie posters became their own genre, Seagal, unsmiling, holding a gun like it was a religious artifact. And then there were the splits. While not as famously flexible as Van Damme, Seagal made a point to showcase his Aikido background with dramatic throws, fluid movements, and intense slow-motion stances that suggested mystical power. And yes, in those early years, he looked good doing it. Tall, commanding, with a lean frame and piercing eyes, Seagal had that dark, stoic look. Like the mysterious stranger who shows up at midnight and knows exactly how to handle danger. or create it. Women noticed. So did casting directors. But behind the camera, things were already becoming complicated. Seagal's self-confidence was described by insiders as overwhelming. He reportedly believed he was spiritually evolved, morally superior, and, according to some crew members, blessed with irresistible charm. He began clashing with stuntmen, allegedly claiming he didn't need a double, and then quietly requesting one after tiring out mid-fight scene. Rumors swirled that his real skills didn't quite match the myth, but the moviegoers didn't care. Not yet. Steven Seagal was officially a star. And if you thought his rise was dramatic, wait until you see the fall. By the early 90s, Steven Seagal wasn't just an action star. He was a full-blown phenomenon. Every movie came with a promise: broken bones, gravelly threats, and Steven's signature Aikido wrist flips, all delivered without ever raising his voice. But while Seagal was dominating the box office, his personal life? Let's just say it was getting harder to choreograph. At this point, Seagal had already left his first wife, Miyako Fujitani, the woman who helped launch his career in Japan, and barely looked back. He returned to the States, leaving her and their 2 children behind, while he built a brand new version of himself in Hollywood. That's right, the spiritual martial arts master ghosted the woman who literally handed him a dojo. Classy. But wait, it gets messier. Because while Seagal was still legally married to Miyako, he began a serious relationship with Adrienne LaRussa, a soap opera actress. The two got married in 1984, which, you guessed it, made that marriage technically invalid. Because again, he was still married to Miyako. Yes, Steven Seagal's romantic timeline was already looking like a legal headache. But the real seismic shift came when Seagal crossed paths with the ultimate 1980s bombshell, Kelly LeBrock. You might remember her from Weird Science, The Woman in Red, or just from being every teenage boy's dream girl. Gorgeous, charismatic, and classically trained, LeBrock was more than just a pretty face, and yet she fell hard for Seagal's mystique, the quiet power. The foreign whispers of, "I've trained in things I can't talk about." That whole dangerous monk vibe, it worked. They began seeing each other, while Seagal was still with Adrienne, who had, in turn, married him while he was still married to Miyako. That's right, we're already in triple overlap territory. Someone should have made a relationship flowchart. Eventually, Seagal untangled the paperwork, or someone else did, and by 1987, he married Kelly LeBrock. They had 3 children together, and for a while it looked like Seagal had settled down. But behind the serene Hollywood mansion gates, it was chaos. Let's talk about the nanny. During the early 1990s, Seagal was allegedly having an intimate relationship with Arissa Wolf, who had originally been hired to care for his and Kelly's children. Rumors flew that the two had gotten involved while Seagal was still married to LeBrock. A claim that gained serious traction when, not long after the split, Arissa had a child with him. Kelly filed for divorce in 1996, citing irreconcilable differences, but insiders whispered it was much, much messier. In interviews years later, LeBrock said she'd remained silent for the sake of her kids, but she described the divorce as something she wouldn't wish on her worst enemy. And here's where things take an even darker turn. Around this time, allegations began bubbling to the surface, from actresses, assistants, former employees, painting a deeply disturbing picture of what it was like to work with Seagal behind the scenes. Some described inappropriate behavior. Others outright accused him of misconduct. While many of these allegations didn't lead to charges, either due to settlements or the passage of time, the cloud around Seagal kept growing. Among the most high-profile were claims by Jenny McCarthy, who said Seagal told her to strip during an audition, and Portia Rossi, who alleged that he unzipped his pants in front of her. There were numerous lawsuits, many later dropped or sealed, and a growing pile of whispers that casting calls with Seagal came with expectations. And yet, Hollywood kept hiring him. Why? Because he was still a moneymaker. Under Siege in 1992 was a box office hit. It was the peak of his career, and ironically, it came just as his off-screen behavior was becoming harder to hide. He had the looks, he had the following, and he had people around him who were more than willing to look the other way if it meant another action franchise. But eventually, that glow started to fade. By the late 90s, Seagal had burned a lot of bridges. His reputation on set was reportedly terrible. Crew members said he was impossible to direct, uncooperative, and always rewriting his lines to make himself look more spiritual, more powerful, or just flat-out invincible. He wouldn't lose a fight. He wouldn't die. He wouldn't even break a sweat. He was no longer playing a character. He was playing Steven Seagal, the mythical super-agent ninja shaman who couldn't be touched. And in real life, that delusion was getting harder to sustain. The scandal with the nanny? Public. The breakup with LeBrock? Ugly. The allegations? Mounting. And as the years passed, the once sleek martial arts star with the cheekbones and killer stare slowly began transforming into something else entirely. By the mid-1990s, the shine on Steven Seagal's ponytail was starting to dull, but behind the scenes a much darker story was brewing, one that had nothing to do with his box office slump, and everything to do with what he was allegedly doing off-set. While he was selling himself as a Zen warrior with a soft voice and a hard right hook, some women in the industry were already whispering the same thing. Steven Seagal was creepy, really creepy, and not in the awkward uncle way, but in the allegedly dangerous way. Let's start with the rumors that haunted his early sets. According to multiple crew members, Seagal had a habit of closing doors during private auditions, often requesting that only young women be present. Some of them were actresses, some were assistants, some had no idea what they were walking into. One of the earliest and loudest voices? Jenny McCarthy. She says she showed up to audition for Under Siege 2 in the mid-90s, expecting a standard read-through. But Seagal, she says, asked her to take off her dress. When she protested, he allegedly insisted that nudity was in the script. Spoiler, it wasn't, and she walked out. Then there's Juliana Margulies, who shared a deeply unsettling encounter. According to her, Seagal told her to come to his hotel room to run lines for a role. When she arrived, the room was dark, the bodyguard was gone, and Seagal was armed with a gun on the coffee table. She stayed just long enough to not seem rude, then got out. Portia de Rossi also went public, saying that during a meeting in his office, Seagal unzipped his pants in front of her, completely unsolicited. When she told her agent what happened, the response was chilling. Well, I didn't know if he was your type. These weren't one-offs. They were a pattern. Dozens of women, many unnamed, would later file civil suits, complaints, and allegations, from background actors and production assistants to stunt women and nannies. Some described inappropriate touching. Some said he offered roles in exchange for favors. Others accused him of much worse. But somehow Seagal always seemed to slither away untouched. Lawsuits were settled, women were discredited, and his image, the spiritual, peace-loving Aikido master, stayed intact for a while. He also leaned heavily into that spiritual vibe. The Zen talk, the Buddhist beads, the whispery voice. But multiple women would later say that the calm guru persona was part of the trap, a way to disarm them, make them feel safe, then cross the line. One woman who worked for him described it like this. He wasn't violent. He was calculated. He made you feel like you owed him your silence. By the late 2000s, more lawsuits started coming in, some alleging everything from unwanted advances to outright misconduct. But again, nothing stuck. He had lawyers, NDAs, a reputation for being litigious. and a lot of scared ex-employees who just wanted to forget they ever worked for him. Meanwhile, his movies were bombing. His hairline was losing altitude. But somehow, Steven Seagal still had enough power or fear behind him to keep critics quiet. For now. By the early 2000s, the game was up, even if Steven Seagal didn't realize it yet. The ponytail was thinning, the martial arts were sluggish, and the Zen mystique had curdled into something more like delusional uncle at Thanksgiving. This was no longer the guy flipping terrorists in slow motion on the big screen. This was the guy doing awkward Aikido moves in backwater Eastern European warehouses, mumbling through low-budget scripts like he was on heavy tranquilizers, which, to be clear, people have speculated about. At his peak in the early 90s, with hits like Under Siege and Hard to Kill, Seagal was reportedly making $5 to $7 million per film, plus back-end deals. Hollywood had bought into his shtick for a minute. But by 2002, he was pumping out bargain bin action flicks with titles like Out for a Kill, yes, again with the kill theme, where he plays an archaeologist/assassin, Belly of the Beast, where he travels to Thailand and inexplicably speaks fluent Thai, badly dubbed, of course. Flight of Fury, a film so low effort it reportedly reused footage from another movie altogether, without permission. Attack Force, where his voice was literally dubbed over in half the scenes, because even he couldn't be bothered to loop his lines. His once $7 million paycheck slashed to $500,000, $1 million per movie, if that. Often filmed in Romania, Bulgaria, or other tax incentive havens, the productions were quick, cheap, and extremely dirty. The scripts were barely coherent. The action was stitched together from body doubles and recycled explosions, and Seagal himself barely moved. We're talking about a man who, by the mid-2000s, had developed a very specific acting style. Never run. Never show emotion. Speak so softly the boom mic begs for mercy. Insist on being a sex symbol, even when you're 60 and panting after every fight scene. And yet, despite the downward spiral, Seagal refused to acknowledge it. He was still surrounding himself with yes-men, still demanding god-tier respect on set, and still pushing the idea that he was part CIA, part samurai, part rock god. Speaking of rock god, let's not forget his music career. Yes, music. He released 2 blues albums, Songs from the Crystal Cave 2005, featuring tracks like Don't You Cry and My God. Mojo Priest 2006, which included him playing guitar on stage with an uncomfortable-looking Stevie Wonder. Neither charted. Both are available online if you're in the mood for spiritual confusion and second-hand embarrassment. But perhaps the cringiest part of the downfall? Seagal still styled himself as the ultimate alpha male, even as younger, faster, far more bankable action stars like Jason Statham and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson took over the genre he once ruled. He also kept talking big, claiming his films were secretly beloved overseas, that he could still choke out any stuntman on set, that the critics just didn't get him, that he was too deep. Let's talk net worth. At his height, estimated at $50 to $60 million. By 2020, more like $16 million, with some reports putting it lower. The decline was a mix of lawsuits, settlements, lavish spending, and simply no one wanting to hire him anymore. He did try TV once. Steven Seagal, Lawman, a reality show where he wore mirrored sunglasses and patrolled Louisiana with a real sheriff's badge. Critics called it propaganda with a ponytail. It was cancelled after 2 seasons, amid yet another lawsuit. By this point, even former fans were jumping ship. His movies had become memes. His interviews were weird. His Aikido looked like sluggish Tai Chi underwater. And his image had morphed from action hero to full-on internet punchline. One journalist described watching his later films as like watching someone cosplay as Steven Seagal, slowly losing interest in the part. Yet he kept going, kept making movies, kept saying the allegations were lies, kept issuing bizarre statements to defend his honor, and when America finally stopped answering his calls, he picked up the phone and dialed Moscow. When the movie offers dried up, the fans disappeared, and the lawsuits kept piling up, Steven Seagal didn't just fade into obscurity, he went global. Specifically, he fled into the warm, shirtless embrace of Vladimir Putin. Yes, really. Let's rewind. By the early 2010s, Seagal was no longer just a B-list action relic. He was fast becoming an unintentional comedy legend. His movies were so bad, his interviews so unhinged, and his personal reputation so shredded that even reality TV didn't want him anymore. So what's a disgraced martial arts action star with delusions of grandeur and a fondness for authoritarian energy to do? Why, get himself adopted by Mother Russia, of course. Citizen Seagal, the Russian reinvention in Vladimir Putin, the former KGB strongman and full-time dictator cosplayer, personally granted Seagal Russian citizenship. The photos were surreal. The former action hero looking puffy, dazed and deeply honored, shaking hands with a man whose idea of diplomacy is poisoning dissidents. To Putin, Seagal was a perfect mascot. American? Check. Famous? Check sort of. Gullible and obedient? Triple check. And to Seagal, Putin was the ultimate alpha male, the martial artist, the leader, the kind of man who didn't care what Hollywood thought. Soon, Seagal was all over Russian state TV, praising Putin's genius, calling him one of the greatest world leaders alive, and even endorsing his actions in Ukraine. Yes, Steven Seagal, the man who once rescued the USS Missouri, was now making pro-Kremlin speeches and serving as Putin's special envoy to the United States. What did that mean? No one really knows. Possibly just a fancy title to make Seagal feel useful again. He even received a Serbian passport, filmed martial arts promo clips for the Russian military, and spoke out against sanctions on Russia, all while the world was watching Ukraine burn. The man who used to shout, "I'm going to take you to the bank," the blood bank, was now defending one of the most aggressive invasions in modern history. The internet punchline seals his fate back in the States. His pivot into politics wasn't winning him new fans, just more memes, mockery and raised eyebrows. Clips of his later martial arts demonstrations in Russia, where he flips men who are clearly throwing themselves at him, went viral for all the wrong reasons. Watching a winded Seagal awkwardly spin in place while attackers somersaulted at his feet was not exactly the triumphant return to form he imagined. Let's just say the deadly Aikido master routine didn't land. And even in Russia, his loyalty was occasionally seen as a bit much. One Russian commentator dryly referred to him as a weaponized nostalgia project, a Hollywood toy now rusting in a Kremlin display case. His legacy: lawsuits, lies, and laughs. By 2023, Seagal's Hollywood reputation was toast. His filmography was cluttered with straight-to-DVD disasters. His net worth was estimated around $14 to $16 million, down from the tens of millions he once commanded. And his legacy: over a dozen women with allegations of misconduct and assault, 3 failed marriages, 1 very public nanny scandal, and a tabloid trail a mile long. A string of lawsuits from stuntmen, assistants, and film crews for everything from unpaid wages to harassment. And a bizarre second act as a Putin fanboy, clinging to relevance via propaganda and photo ops. He wanted to be Bruce Lee meets James Bond. He ended up as the punchline to a very long, very weird joke. The final scene. Steven Seagal's story isn't just about one man's ego, though there's plenty of that to go around. It's about what happens when Hollywood myth-making collides with unchecked arrogance. And no one has the guts to say, hey, maybe tone it down. He wasn't a CIA agent. He wasn't a spiritual healer. He wasn't a samurai. He was a man who played one on TV, and eventually even that was too much. From dojo hustler to action icon to alleged predator to Putin's pet, Steven Seagal's life is proof that sometimes the biggest fight is against your own delusion. fade to black. And maybe one last slow-motion Aikido roll.